Hey guys, welcome back to another month of HospitaliTV Wine Club Wines. Thank you as always for the support. This month we are jumping into Cabernet Franc. I know I say this a lot. This is actually one of my favorite grapes. I'm trying to think of a grape I actually don't really like. I think it would only be maybe Gewürztraminer for the white. Sorry, Gewürztraminer. But honestly, truly, I think that this is a grape that brings a lot to the table. A lot with its secondary components that we talk about a lot. It truly is an incredibly well-rounded grape depending on where you grow it. So some of the key regions for Cabernet Franc, actually, the most important region in my opinion is the Loire Valley in France. The Loire Valley in general, an incredibly dynamic region, right? On the very western part of the Loire, on the border of the Atlantic, you have Muscadet, some really cool, light, crushable white wines. Then you move to the appellation next door, you start going into Chenin Blanc land where they make it in a variety of styles. And then next door, a little bit further inland, is where you get to Touraine, and that's where you find some of the best regions for Cabernet Franc. So you're looking at places like Chinon, probably the most well-known region in the Loire Valley for Cabernet Franc, so definitely look out for that. Chinon, Bourgueil, and Saint-Nicolas de Bourgueil. And Saumur-Champigny also, which is not in the Touraine, it's right next door, but it's very close, and it's another region that makes amazing Cabernet Franc. So you should definitely look out for those four regions. And then you go further inland, still talking about the Loire Valley, to the areas of Sancerre where they're making killer Sauvignon Blanc. So it's really, really an amazing region. Some killer wines that come out of there, definitely a region you should be paying attention to. Cabernet Franc also does very well as a Bordeaux varietal, right? We see it a lot at the right bank of Bordeaux where they blend it in with Merlot to make some of the best wines of the world. Chateau Petrus out of Pomerol, incredibly high percentages of Cabernet Franc. Chateau Ausson and some other grapes like that are very Cabernet Franc heavy. So it's kind of funny, again, sometimes people have their stereotypes of a certain grape and they may have tried one wine that's a Cabernet Franc that they didn't like, and they kind of just take it off the list of options forever. And I think that it's important to try new wines. So that's what the Wine Club is all about. So for the old world, we do have a wine coming out of Bourgueil that we're gonna taste today. And then new world regions, right? Of course, California, there's some killer wines coming out of Napa, Sonoma, Carneros. One of my favorites we used to sell at the restaurant was a Robert Sinski Cabernet Franc Merlot blend, kind of in the sense and the style of that right bank Bordeaux. That was unbelievable. You can look for great wines out of Washington that are Cabernet Franc, and even Ontario, Canada is a region that you should be looking for that make amazing wines and some really killer Cabernet Franc coming out of there too. So for today, however, we're going to be going into the Saint Ynez Valley for our New World Cabernet Franc. So let's dig into the wines. So wine number one, we have Cabernet Franc by Domaine de la Chanteleuserie. I hope I'm not butchering that too bad. But this is out of Bourgueil, right? The region that we were talking about in the Loire Valley. The family itself has been making wines here. They're sixth generation family winemakers. And this is coming in from an import book called Kermit Lynch. They bring in amazing wines of very heavy French representation. But that's kind of another thing you can start paying attention to maybe eventually is who imports the wine, right? You start to know an import book and the ethos behind what they're bringing into the market, and it's really helpful to know. Kermit Lynch Wine Merchant, they do an amazing job with a lot of imports, so very happy to have this wine on board. We're looking at a 2018 vintage, right? Typically what I would expect out of Cabernet Franc would be kind of a medium-bodied style of red wine. You typically get these drier red fruit components, right? Medium plus acidity. The tannins tend to be medium plus. I know it may seem like a vague term, but they're definitely not as high as Cabernet Sauvignon, for example, and they are more intense than Pinot Noir if you're going to kind of compare it within those parameters. So, but what I really enjoy about Cabernet Franc as a single varietal wine is that it typically tends to show this slightly herbaceous characteristic. So it can be like green bell pepper, you get this dried herb, dried sage component that comes in the wine that really makes it a dynamic wine, like I was saying up front, right? It really is a very well-rounded wine because of all these things. So let's taste the wine, let's see what we think. Interesting, so on the nose, it's very red fruit driven, right? Very dark red berry, dark red cherry, darker cranberry. And there's a little bit of that sprinkle of dried herbs that we're talking about. So let's see if that follows through from the nose onto the palate. Wow, yeah, the flavor profile is incredible. So it's actually kind of ripe stewed red fruit up front that transitions into somewhat of a drier finish. You definitely get that dry herb, dry green bell pepper, maybe dried jalapeno that's coming through. Not that it's spicy necessarily, but it is kind of peppery. And then for sure you're getting some of that black pepper component that comes through on the wine. There's almost a sense of bitterness to the wine. I don't want to scare you off, but because of these dried elements, it is more of a savory style. That being said, there is a beautiful combination of fruit and dried herbs to this wine. Again, I think it's a very complex wine. It has a lot going on to it. If you kind of want to have a glass that has multiple layers and things going on to it, I love going to this old world style of Loire Valley Cabernet Franc. Another thing I didn't mention was there's like a gravelly minerality to it, right? This whole underlying thing that there is an earthiness to the wine, not barnyardy, funky, like sometimes we can get in Bordeaux. It's definitely a little cleaner, but it's certainly there. Yeah, super, super classic as it gets. Gravelly minerality throughout the whole way. Red fruit up front with a drier red fruit finish. You have that dried herbal component with a little bit of pepper. The acidity kind of lingers through. Really, really a fun wine. And I think a really good classic representation of Cabernet Franc out of this region. So I really hope you guys like this. Let me know what you think, please. Moving into the new world, we have Brave and Maiden. So these guys have only started making wine since 2011. The vineyards have been planted here, I think since the 70s. But they've gone through a couple hands so far. They're located in the Santa Ynez region of Santa Barbara. What's cool about them too is that they do have Paul Hobbs consulting on their wines, legendary winemaker from Napa. They have them as a consultant on their Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc wines, which is pretty cool. And their current winemaker has worked with several other notable winemakers from Santa Barbara region. So they have a pretty good pedigree, good winemaking style. Let's taste the wine and see what we think. Just as a note too, both of these wines are 2018 vintage and they're both 14.5% alcohol, which is a little surprising for the Loire Valley Cab Franc. I typically expect it to be a little bit more towards 13.5, 13. It didn't taste incredibly rich, but there's some alcohol to it. So let's try out the Brave and Maiden out of Santa Ynez. Bam. So right away on the nose is a lot more lush and big and ripe compared to the Domaine de la Chanteleuserie. I am getting some of these herbal notes, but again, I think there's a ripeness of fruit here that's kind of dominating the nose. I want to see kind of where that goes in the palate. Let's take a whirl. Oh yeah, there is nothing subtle about that wine. That's why I love it when I tasted it. It is a big, rich, modern style of Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc for the Cabernet Sauvignon drinker. There is an intensity of ripe red fruit that's very dominant in the wine, but there is still the trademark herbaceousness that comes through on the finish, which is great. Sometimes when you get wines that are too lush and ripe, they tend to take over, and also you tend to lose the secondary notes that are characteristics of those grapes. And I don't like that when that happens. So even though this wine is very big and ripe, there is still the trademark herbaceousness, bell pepper, little black pepper that comes through, but in a much richer, riper, weightier body to this wine. Again, I think if you're a Cabernet Sauvignon drinker, or forget that, if you just love bigger, richer styles of red, this Cabernet Franc is definitely for you. That is absolutely fantastic. It does have that trademark, even though it's so ripe up front, it has kind of a drier red fruit finish at the end. And I love that. It's definitely on the border of almost too much fruit, but I love that it is in balance. I love that it does have this big, ripe fruit attack up front, but it's very much in check with the herbaceousness and pepperiness of this wine. So, man, that's tasty. I hope you guys like that wine. Let me know what you think. Thank you for your support. Let me know if you have any questions on any of these wines. We'll see you soon.